the Medical AI Podcast.
Hello, I'm Dr. Felix Beecher, and this is the Medical AI Podcast, a 30-minute thrill ride of big ideas. We talk to a range of top guests, from industry innovators to scientists to philosophers. This is brought to you by Omdia and Informatech, where I'm the head of healthcare technology. The scientific literature on medical AI is bursting at the seams with potential applications from superhuman diagnostics and prognostics to methods for precision medicine. On the other hand, if you go to your doctor, you're unlikely to encounter any of these. So why is that? What is holding things up? Are there fundamental blockages? Or are we about to see an explosion of medical AI in the real world? There is no one better placed to discuss this than Tom Lawry, one of the true rock stars of medical AI. He's had many big roles in the field, and his latest book is the best-selling Hacking Healthcare: How AI and the Intelligence Revolution Will Reboot an Ailing System. Tom, I'm thrilled to have you on as a guest. Thank you for joining.
Well, Felix, thank you so much. Thanks for that introduction. If we were on camera, you'd see I'm blushing with that introduction, but thank you for that.
So could you just introduce yourself and your work in medical AI?
Sure, of course. So Tom Lawry, you mentioned I've got a couple books out there, including my latest, Hacking Healthcare. The books are really my attempt to take many years of learning and experience and try and put it in some usable form. So I've been an exec at Microsoft, a national director for artificial intelligence, for health and life sciences for the Americas. Prior to that, I spent 6 years as director of worldwide health, which meant 80% of my work was actually working with payers and providers and governments around the use of data and analytics to improve healthcare. Prior to that, GE Healthcare, 7 years in the venture-backed startup world doing hosted software for healthcare. Prior to that, 10 years running health systems in America. And as I think you know, prior to that, I had a paper route.
So could you talk about that first paper?
Probably not, Felix.
Okay, so what first got you really interested in the field of medical AI?
Well, it really started with my experience working in a hospital and a health system. And it was fascinating to me. This was a while ago where, I was a fairly high-level executive running medical centers and health systems. And it was interesting to me how many times we had massive amounts of data. We were spending millions of dollars on computers and EMRs. And yet the availability of data for people to make everyday decisions to be better at what they did was hard to come by. And that really got me started on that journey of the value of data in health and medicine, the ability to access that data, and then, frankly, to use that data to essentially empower people on the front lines to be better at what they do. And so it started on that. And then, as you know, in the last 6-7 years, artificial intelligence has really come to the forefront. Some of that has been a lot of hype, but, much of it is beginning to take hold. So it's been that steady process of saying, how do we do better, improve quality, improve access, create greater efficiencies? And I believe that's going to be done by making better use of data. So it's a continuum. At the low end, it can be sometimes as simple as spreadsheets, but on the high end that everyone's moving towards, it's the use of artificial intelligence to do things that heretofore was only done by humans. Now we're basically getting so smart, we're outsourcing what the human brain previously could only do to AI.
Okay, so let's start with some basics. In the title of your latest book, you say that healthcare is an ailing system. So can you unpack what you mean by that?
Yeah, well, I think there are challenges around the world, but since I'm sitting in the United States. Let's just focus on the United States. So it's fascinating to me that we have an exceptionally talented group of clinicians, doctors, nurses, researchers in America. We've got the best technology. We spend more per capita on each citizen than any country in the world. And yet, if you look at any standard quality measures, we come in last. Probably the best survey and study is the ongoing work done by the Commonwealth Fund. America is last on every quality measure, every access measure. So the question is, why is that? Again, great people, best technology, and yet there's something missing where we score lower on certain metrics than many third world countries. So I look at that. I look at where we're going. I look at things like the workforce crisis. And as I put forward in my book, this will only get worse unless we have fundamental systemic change. And to me, that starts with acknowledging the problems, and then it's looking at how we use things like digital transformation to make those changes that are needed to do a better job of leveraging those talented workers, to do a better job of managing the finite resources that are going into healthcare.
Now, obviously, the US health system is an extremely complex issue. I'm guessing that there are also political issues there too. I mean, do you want to talk about that? What do you think those political issues are before we start talking about?
Well, first of all, so I'll stay on the United States, but if you're sitting in the UK and you want to talk about large, complex systems that are political, we could talk about the NHS, but we probably won't. No, so. What's interesting is at the heart of things, particularly in America, again, we already talked about great workforce, great technology, lots of money going in. And, part of it, to me, as I look at root cause that needs to change in order to facilitate change, America mainly works on what I call a break-fix model. Hospitals, provider organizations make money when they fix something. They do a medical procedure, they do a surgical procedure. And as much as we all talk about managing health, if you classically follow the money, reimbursement is based on the break-fix model rather than having extreme incentives to manage one's health. And so to me, that's the start. But it goes beyond that. Even within that model, there are many ways in which we can be making better use of data, better use of AI, whether it's medically related or whether it's just improving efficiencies. So even within that break-fix economic model, there are things we can do. There are times where, many health organizations are not the first to innovate when it comes to non-medical breakthroughs. So you bring all that together, we have a tremendous number of talented people, clinicians, health executives, that are kind of caught in this model that somehow we have to move beyond. And a lot of that is the way, the regulations and the laws are governing the incentives and the payments for managing one's health.
So when you mix capitalism and medicine, you get doctors who want to make you ill, essentially.
Well,
does that sound cynical?
I'm going to push back. No, Felix, I'm going to push back on that. No, I've never, in my 20 plus years of working in and around healthcare, come across a clinician whose intent isn't extremely good. They didn't go into medical school thinking, I'm going to make a lot of money. They went into medical school because it was a mission, because it was a calling. They want to do the right thing, but when you look at things like the cost of a practice, they are caught many times in the same model that everyone's caught in, including consumers. And again, the economic models are a little different from country to country. So if I do look at the UK, unlike the United States, your great country by constitution guarantees that healthcare is a right. Now the question becomes a right to what? How do you access it? What are the cues when all of a sudden you have a diagnosis? So, some models work better than others, but it fundamentally gets down to how do we align incentives and the system and then arm our very limited, valued clinical population with tools and processes to allow them to be the best at what they do. And to me, that's the value of AI. AI is not about technology. AI is about empowerment.
So could you explain a little bit more about what you mean there?
Of course. So there was a study, I believe, by McKinsey that showed up to a third of all activities done by doctors and nurses could be automated with AI. So when you dig deeper on that, what you see is, here in America, a doctor spends more time doing administrative things than they do seeing patients. So you look at all the processes such as EMRs and documentation, and we've turned our best clinicians sometimes into basically clerical workers. So imagine the ability to do things like eliminate or reduce those repetitive, low-value activities and allow them to have, another study shows, up to a third of a doctor's time could be saved by reducing these repetitive activities. So imagine going to a clinician and saying, what if I could give you a third of your time back to spend more time with patients, to do research, or to do something as simple as get home for dinner more often with your family. Yeah. And that's where, when it comes to empowerment, that's what we're talking about.
I see.
And the same goes not just for clinicians, but consumers. I think one of the things the pandemic taught people is all of a sudden, when the pandemic first hit and COVID was rampant and the hospitals were all filled with very infectious patients, consumers had to figure out how to take care of themselves in other unique ways. And I think it was that movement that started during the pandemic where consumers turned much more towards digital tools and self-service. All of which, so when you look at smartphones and a smart app, they call them smart because behind everything you're doing is some form of AI.
Sure. Okay, so Tom, could you give one or maybe two examples of current medical AI systems which illustrate the potential of medical AI, either how it's moving currently or how it could be developing in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So, right now in the here and now. So let's take the conversation we just were having about clinicians, workforce automation. So there's a great company called Nuance and there are other companies, but they're the leader that have for years been working on what we call ambient intelligence. So anywhere you're listening, if you're a doctor, if you're a consumer, what happens when you go to your primary care doctor? Typically when I go, I go in, I sit in this very small, boring cubicle, and when the doctor walks in, and I've got a great primary care doctor, looks me in the eye, says, "Hi, Tom, why are you here?" The only time he ever really looks me in the eye is when he walks in. What does he do after that? He goes to the corner of the room, signs onto his computer in the EMR, and starts hunting and pecking while he's asking me questions. And then after the visit, he's got to do more hunting and pecking and documentation. So Nuance has found a way to put sensors and other things in the room where a doctor can walk in, simply have that normal conversation, look you in the eye, go through the exam. And in the background, all of these things are capturing the dialogue. They're capturing many things. It's starting to pre-develop those clinical outtake notes. And it allows the doctor to focus on the patient. They've got great stats. Not only does it improve the quality of care, it improves physician satisfaction and dramatically lowers the time it takes to be performing those administrative tasks each time they see a patient. So it's things like that I think often don't get talked about, but our ability to make those things easier and better, I think have great promise. Flipping to other things, one of the biggest things happening right now is intelligence being stitched into any type of image, diagnostic images, pathology images. not to replace the work of radiologists, but rather, again, to help them get ahead of things, to save them time, to point out some things that might have taken them a little longer to see on their own. But it's all about how we use AI to come in behind clinicians to make them better at something they care about.
Those are nice examples. All right, so let's talk about implementation. Do you, in the preamble, I talked about the discrepancy between the scientific literature, which is kind of burgeoning with examples of systems that can be developed very easily, actually, for diagnostics, for example, and actually the clinical practice. If you go and see your doctor, the likelihood that you will actually encounter one of these. Now, do you think that there are fundamental roadblocks with the development of the implementation of AI, medical AI, currently?
Well, the simple answer is yes. I assume since we have 30 minutes, you want me to expand on that.
We can move straight on. No, go on.
No, so let's address that at several levels. One, there are some fundamental issues with infrastructure and approach to AI. And I would, without geeking out on you, I would say the number one thing there is what I was talking about earlier, which is we have massive amounts of data. It's growing at an exponential rate every day, and yet we're not making the best use of that. Why? We have systems that were never set up to aggregate, assimilate, and make that data valuable. So I'm often asked, I get to do keynotes around artificial intelligence in a lot of places. I've never been asked to do a keynote on creating and managing what I call a modern data estate, which is critical to being able to develop and deploy artificial intelligence at scale. And what that means is, imagine our ability to have any clinician, not just a researcher, be able to have a problem and start pulling any data they need to solve it, or to have things like machine learning help them make predictions around things they care about. Those are the things that relate to data estate that are critical to solve for. Beyond that, there's the human element, which is many people recognize the processes we have are not good, but they're the ones that people are used to. So it's that inertia for changing the way things are done, which gets down to what's the culture of an organization for change and process improvement? Is there a culture that embraces what I call a culture of being data-driven? And many times, these things, in my work as an advisor to some big organizations, come down to you can hire a great team of data scientists and medical informaticists. They can spin up some simple use cases, but driving value at scale comes down to what I call the leadership imperative. Leaders in these big organizations must understand what it is, how to help push for change, and be the number one evangelist and champion as those executives driving these big health systems.
Okay, now let's talk about politics a little bit more. Do you talk to politicians and policymakers? How do those conversations go?
Well, I usually try and avoid that, but no, look, you're touching on an area that we could easily spend another podcast on. So, one, I would say everyone's early in the journey when it comes to the application of AI to health and medicine. And as such, and in many other cases with tech trends, the technology often gets out ahead of policymakers. So I think we're in that state now. Eventually they catch up. Regulations, laws reflect what's happening and put appropriate guardrails in place. So today, I would say, politicians are looking at that, and I think every major developed country. But the simple reality is today, you can be deploying AI in health and medicine and have it be totally legal, totally compliant with any regulations such as HIPAA in America, GDPR in Europe, and still be highly unethical. And that's where there's a whole emerging area called responsible AI to say, how do we make sure that artificial intelligence applied in health and medicine is going to benefit all citizens and not just some? And I can give you examples, but essentially what we're seeing, and there's lots of literature that's documenting this, where many of the biases that we see in the physical world of healthcare are starting to cross over into the digital world through bias in things like algorithms. And there are many ways in which we can look to identify and mitigate that. But many times we're seeing algorithms, machine learning predictions being put in the field, and they're actually doing overall good. But the challenge is they're benefiting one population more so than another. It's legal, it's regulatorily compliant, but is that the right thing to be doing? And that is the question we all need to pay attention to. And eventually, hopefully, the regulators and legislators will figure out how to put those guardrails in to make sure that it's basically coming down to AI and equity for all rather than some.
But this is fascinating because, what you've just espoused is essentially a philosophical stroke political position, right? Now, let's just imagine that an AI system is going to improve healthcare for everybody, but for some groups more than others. Now, would you consider that to be a problem or not?
Well, that's why I turn around. If we could open up the conversation to everyone listening, that is, in fact, the question. So a quick example. So everyone listening now is now part of our new AI team. We're putting together predictive capabilities for an acute trust in the UK or a hospital in America. And what we're going to do is we put 100 patients in the hospital every day as inpatients. We're going to use this algorithm to risk rate which of those patients I've admitted are at high risk of an unexpected adverse event. So we put the algorithm in play, we do a pilot, and what we found is of the 100 patients we put in the hospital a couple of weeks ago, we were able to predict which ones were going to have an adverse event and reduce those adverse events by 40%. So if I'm the head of quality, that's a quality win. If I'm the head of finance and I'm not having someone stay in the hospital longer, that's a financial win. But so that's a statistical average, 40%. If I told you that statistical average consisted of being 3 times better at predicting and preventing adverse events in white males versus Hispanic females, would that be okay? I'm improving quality, I'm saving money, but it's better for one population than the other. That is, in fact, the issue and dilemma. It's happening today in algorithms because they haven't been stress tested for what normally in the business would be called statistical variability, but nevertheless, it's impacting one set of patients more than another. And it's not for me to answer, but if you're sitting there as a clinician, you're sitting there as a consumer or as an NHS executive, do you think that would be okay? That is, in fact, the question that we must address.
These kind of inequalities are, I would have thought, totally inevitable. If you've got a population of, 10 million people from the United States, and it's completely taken at random, you're going to have some Inuit natives, you can have some Native Americans, you can have some Pacific Islanders. All of those people are going to be massively underrepresented, right? So those kind of biases cannot be escaped from, I would have thought.
Well, and that's where I wouldn't disagree so much as to say we can't just say, hey, it happens and let it go. So, there's an old adage in the business saying all data models are flawed, but some are useful. So just to your point, we look at here in the United States, the majority of data is, based on a system where healthcare is not guaranteed as a right constitutionally like it is in the UK. So all of that data means there are some people that are more represented in that database than others. So just simply being aware of that, looking at data as you're putting it into the development of something to predict things, the awareness alone, goes a long way. There are also ways of balancing, adjusting data, stress testing it, where I think to your point, statistically speaking, to say you can get databases that are totally free of bias is probably inaccurate. The goal and the challenge is awareness and then attempts to use current and emerging tools to reduce the variability to what would be considered an acceptable level. But just to turn a blind eye to it, that's why they call it an ethical issue. It's it's something that regulators and legislators are looking at. But once again, we're doing overall good for the population served, but at times it's not as even as what I think we would like it to be.
So let's talk a little bit about regulation. Do you have a perspective on how the current state of regulation in the US is on medical AI? Do you think it's too hard or too soft?
Well, I think right now it's emerging. I would say it's neither. I think everyone, again, we're all early in the journey, including legislators and regulators. So, I think there are attempts. I think there are certain qualities of regulations like GDPR that are attempting to address that, but it needs to go farther. This is where, looking at the guardrails now and being mindful of it, and probably the best example is, work done by groups like the FDA, where, they are responsible for and required to regulate medical devices to ensure they do not do harm. But one of the challenges is when devices were simply something that data ran through, that was easy. But now all of a sudden, devices are all becoming more intelligent with the introduction of things like built-in algorithms. That totally changes the approach the FDA needs to take to, managing approvals of those devices. And I kid, and I don't want to geek out on you, but it's like if you want to see the head explode of a regulator, talk to them about a continuous learning algorithm getting put into a medical device where every time data is run through it, the algorithm is ratcheting. So you can take and look at the algorithm that that's going into it, but 2 days later, it's going to be different. So how do you put the guardrails around something like that? And again, we'll eventually figure it out. But right now, these are some of the challenges faced by all, and also at times slowing down the progress of doing more good.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's potentially fantastic technology that is on the basis of current axioms in regulation, impossible to regulate, right? It's super interesting. All right, look, do you have an example of medical AI which has gone spectacularly wrong, and what can we learn from that?
I don't know if I've got any that went spectacularly wrong. I think we've seen a lot of people who have amazingly great intent, are very enthusiastic about using AI to transform their practice or medicine in general, that don't get things right when they introduce new things because for any of a number of reasons. So I've not seen anything that's been a spectacular failure that harms patients and consumers. I have seen a lot of things. It's like, before the Wright brothers, how many people tried to create a flying machine, and how many of them actually made it off the ground? And a lot of that to me comes down to everyone's learning. But we're also seeing that there's certain wisdom or rules that should apply if you're serious about. In my book, I introduce and talk about what I call the intelligent health revolution. Everyone in healthcare today, in any developed nation, is pretty much using AI. The question is, how will you use it to improve quality, to improve access, and then how will you really use it to change the very nature of your organization and how you serve people? And, that's where there's a lot of thinking, there's a lot of trial and error. Mm-hmm. There's some organizations that increasingly are getting it right, but they're what I call traditional health organizations. They will use AI to make current processes more efficient. Those driving towards intelligent health organizations or systems are going to do that, plus they're understanding AI and looking at how to change everything, the processes, the patient experience, by making it better through the use of intelligent applications.
So do you ever get long dark nights of the soul where you can't get to sleep because there are certain things you worry about with the development of medical AI.
Well, it's funny. There's so much talk about, and still just even going back a couple of years ago in the clinical literature, things like articles on, AI is going to replace the nurse and the doctor. And one article that was very well known and published in a journal I won't mention, that basically suggested maybe we should think about training fewer radiologists. Anytime I hear something like that, I think two things. One, they don't understand what AI is actually good at. And two, they really don't understand what a radiologist does. So I would just net that out by quickly saying anyone who understands AI understands, again, I said it earlier, the human brain's an amazing thing. It's such an amazing thing. We've actually figured out how to outsource certain things that only the brain could do through AI and actually have it be better. So when it comes to things like pattern recognition, going through massive amounts of data to find things, AI is superior. But when you look at what the human brain is good at and will always be better than AI, things like wisdom, judgment, knowledge, experience, creativity. Think about that. Anyone who's a caregiver, diagnosis, treatment, those are all things unique to humans. And so I can take data and AI, and I do a lecture where I kind of make fun of this, where, I can take data and come up with correlation for almost anything. But anyone who understands clinical practice knows there's a difference between correlation and causation. And it's that difference where, our job is to take AI, bring it in behind those clinicians, those health executives, to make them better at what they do by knowing what AI can help with, and then acknowledging and honoring the fact that the humans have all this knowledge that's not going to change, not going to go out of style when it comes to how we do healthcare, how we practice medicine. And any industry where there's highly repetitive activities that doesn't require variation or judgment, I would not want to have a job like that. Those are the jobs that will go away. But most everyone in healthcare today is a knowledge worker. And that's where bringing in the best of AI, putting it in and behind those people will make them better at what they do. That in turn hopefully is going to make healthcare better at what it should be.
Okay, Tom, we could talk all day long, and it's been a massive pleasure, and hopefully we will have you back on. And but in the meantime, thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's a great program, and really appreciate having the opportunity to talk to you.
Cheers, Tom. Talk to you again. Thank you for listening. I'm Felix Beecher. Ping me on LinkedIn for more information on Omdia's services in healthcare technology. See you next time.